welcome to Tuesday's Training Tips. And today I'm going to talk about Edward Thorndyke. Edward Thorndyke was an American psychologist and he studied education and learning. He's credited with instrumental learning, but also Thorndyke's law of effect. And basically, Thorndyke's law of effect tells us that if a behavior is followed by something pleasant, then it's more likely to be repeated. And if a behavior is followed by something unpleasant, then it's more likely not to be repeated. B.F. Skinner took this work and developed what we now know as operant conditioning in the 4 quadrants. But Thorndyke's law of effect is very important to me as a dog trainer. And it's something that if you've been on my workshops, you'll know that I stress. Because there is one sentence that distills what Thorndyke's research did and tells us that every behavior has a consequence. Here you can see a photograph of the whiteboard in our training lab where it's permanently written on the wall, just to remind us that every behavior has a consequence. And when we're developing training plans, then we're going to turn to Thorndyke's law of effect and see what is the consequence of the dog's conducting this behavior. How can I make it pleasant so they're more likely to repeat it? Or if the dog's doing something we don't want them to do, then what is the consequence for the dog? Why is it doing that behavior? Because something is obviously pleasurable for the dog, even though we don't want it to happen. And then we can change that behavior by changing the consequence. Now, something else that is extremely important that we should consider is what does the dog find pleasant from a behavior and what the dog finds unpleasant from a behavior. So when you have a training problem, if it's something the dog is doing and you don't want it to do, then look at what the dog sees as the pleasant consequence, and you're going to have to change that. If the dog won't do something you want it to do, then look at the consequence from the dog's mind and see, what do I need to change? This is why the reward selection assessment is so important, because the consequence of a behavior must be pleasant. And if we're rewarding the dog, or if we're reinforcing a behavior with something the dog doesn't really desire, then we're not giving it a reinforcer that increases the likelihood of it repeating that behavior. So, Thorndyke's law of effect. Every behavior has a consequence. And if you remember nothing else about dog training, remember that one sentence. Remember, how can I implement consequences the dog desires to make it do something? How can I change the consequence of a behavior so it's unpleasant to make it stop doing something? But more importantly, assess what the dog is finding pleasant and what the dog is finding unpleasant and why it's either doing or not doing certain behaviors.